Welcome again to The Man Who Woke Up the Buddha. This is Season 2, Episode 6, The Buddha Gets In on the Action. Previously, Sid, Marcus, and the Buddha pondered the purpose of winning and losing in the scheme of universal human traits as they watched a Michigan-Notre Dame football game. During the last play, with the game on the line, they came up with a powerful new mantra. This scene takes place the next day. "Hi," Carolyn said brightly, pausing as the screen door closed behind her. She was surprised and a little uncomfortable to see Sid at the kitchen table alone, glasses on the tip of his nose, reading some large newspaper, Barron's probably. Sid was terribly fond of his daughter-in-law. Of course, now that he was the Buddha, he was fond of everybody. But he also admired Carolyn for many reasons, 3 in particular. She wouldn't take any shit from him. She wouldn't take any shit from his son Jake. And she was Casper's mother. Carolyn was full-bodied and lush with auburn hair that didn't know when to quit. But she had a kind of quiet reserve that always surprised him. She had a lot of disconnects like that. When you first met her, you'd expect her to be severe, a ball-buster in the vernacular. But her voice was remarkably soft and sometimes seemed to overflow with kindness. He'd never heard her speak critically of anybody, and married to Jake, she certainly had a lot to criticize. But there was something else. "Could you bring me that plate of chocolate chip cookies," he asked, "and not eat them all the way over like your husband would?" She smiled and took one as she walked over with it. "Di said she was going to go watch Casper's Little League practice because I was working, and that she'd bring him here after. I guess I'm a little early." Sid waved it off. It didn't matter why she was there. In a sense, it didn't even matter who she was. The fact that she was there made her the sole focus of his attention, which was grounded in that strange beneficence that he had started enveloping everyone with who came in his presence, at least since he'd become the Buddha. Carolyn had stayed mostly in the background during his illness. That was her tendency anyway, but well, he was Abby and Melissa's dad. She almost felt like she needed their permission to do anything besides what they asked. She had her own parents too, of course, but they lived 3,000 miles away, so this was her family. Plus, this was, well, Sid. She'd never met anyone like him, and approached him with a combination of appreciation, awe, and a little trepidation. If she were honest, she'd admit she wasn't really sure what drew her so strongly to Jake, until she met his father. "Can I offer you a spot of tea?" he said with a laugh, subtly making light fun of her hesitation. She turned around to look for the teapot, but he had already lumbered to his feet and lit the stove. He took out the tea, but she waved him back to his seat and took over, getting cups and milk and reaching into the cookie jar. "Is Casper still wearing that clip-on tie to school? Where the hell did that come from? Is he rebelling against his stoner dad and grandfather?" She finally relaxed a little. "Harry Potter." "Oh, of course. He's got a crush on Hermione, does he? Well, a clip-on isn't going to work. Tell him next time he's over, I'll teach him how to tie a real tie and how to loosen it just right. Do that thing with the collar. Does he need more white shirts? Can't be buttoned down. We'll have to think about that school robe they wear in the film. Something that hints of it without standing out too much. I might have some robes somewhere," the Buddha thought. "Too conspicuous," Sid said out loud, realizing with a touch of relief that he could have been saying it to Carolyn as easily as the Buddha. Well, certainly Dumbledore has some. The boy would probably prefer them anyway, the Buddha realized. Clearly he's in the Dumbledore family. When Carolyn brought the tea to the table, Sid paused. "You know, I think I'd rather have chocolate milk." "Okay," she said quizzically. After she brought him his milk, she sat down and took a little sip of tea. He noticed her hand trembled a little. "This chocolate milk thing is getting out of hand," he laughed. "I'm up to 3 or 4 a day. Wonder if I'll lose my taste for it when I start radiation." "What's the matter?" She was taken aback. She hadn't said anything or even changed her expression, but there was something the matter. "Sid, I'm it sounds, ugh." She burst into tears. She'd been masking it for so long, and now here was Sid of all times for the mask to drop. Shh, the Buddha whispered to Sid, who nodded in agreement. He reached over for a napkin and slid it across the table. I gotta go. I really gotta go. I can't have Casper see me this way. It could be anything. Maybe she and Jake were having problems. Heck, maybe she was pregnant again and thought she should have an abortion. Or she got fired? Knew something about Jake? Something he'd done? But when he looked at her more closely, he saw it, felt it in that place at the point of the rib cage and the stomach. It takes one to know one. He was like 27 or 28 when it overwhelmed him. Abby was only about 3, Melissa an infant, Jake still in the ethers. Daddy went off on a long business trip, Abby. He'll be back soon. The long trip was just a few miles away, to a psychiatric hospital. After 2 weeks, Sid had stabilized enough to go back to his daily life. He learned to put on a mask in public. He only talked about it with Di. She didn't panic, at least on the surface. Years later, Marcus told him that they had talked almost daily. For the next year or so, Sid was almost constantly aware of a highly anxious and depressed self sitting right over his shoulder. A clusterfuck of synapses run wild. It was grueling. He felt possessed, not by a figment of his imagination, but by someone ancient, biblical, trapped in a world of wailing and gnashing of teeth. He slept fitfully, woke up at 5 a.m. with anxiety run rampant. And then it lifted. One morning it was just gone, as if some angel had come and banished the darkness. He never wanted to go there again, but was glad he had. He was a kinder, gentler Sid, still porous more than ever, but no longer possessed. After seeing what had happened in his brain, it was hard to judge what was going on in another's, whether they were alive today or hundreds of years ago. Now, Carolyn was on her own deep dive into the darkness. She too had learned to mask it, but he could see it in her eyes. Sid picked up his cell phone. I'm just going to text Di and tell her to take Casper out for dinner. Carolyn nodded. Do you need me to call Jake? She shook her head. He and Chucky are on their way into Boston for the game. They sat that way for a bit. Come to the living room, would you? I get uncomfortable if I sit straight like this too long. Oh, Sid, I'm sorry, you're the last. Actually, I may be the first. She nodded, her head down, and went into the living room, leaving her tea on the table. He poured 2 small shots of cognac, a little more for himself than her, put hers down on the table next to her, before settling into his Barcalounger and tilting back with a sigh. Certain positions, my head just doesn't hurt so much. She nodded, took a sip of her drink, and let out a big sigh. Then another of relief, as if she just avoided getting run over by a car. A little better? A little. Yeah, I'll be okay. Yes, she would, but he could tell from her tone that it would take a while. Would you like me to take over? The Buddha asked. Sometimes the old tricks still help. Sid nodded and he let Gautama emerge, struggling to make his voice and language as close to normal as possible. Lie on the floor, dear girl. She looked up at him. Dear girl? But Sid's eyes were closed. He was tilted back, holding the cognac glass in his hand. Why don't you get one of those pillows for your head? For the next 20 minutes or so, the Buddha spoke slowly, carefully dissolving the mass in the pit of her stomach, letting the lump in her throat soften and spread out into her chest, where it became like a protective breastplate of armor. Finally, he worked his way into her brain, where he carefully disentangled the twisted strings of energy. As many as he could without risking an even greater breakdown. Or breakup. At the end, the Buddha said softly, Carolyn, dear girl, you're ascending into madness. He emphasized ascending. Your breakdown will be a breakthrough, but it will take time. Be kind to yourself. Ask for help whenever you need it. It's not to be ashamed of. Sid opened his eyes and tilted himself back up. A minute or so later, she opened hers. "Where did you learn to do that?" she asked, still lying there looking up at the ceiling. He had no clue. "I'm the Buddha, remember?" He laughed, and she came close to joining him. "But you've been there." "Oh, yeah," he smiled, "before Jake was born." "Well," she almost smiled back, "you certainly got over it." "It passed, and it will for you." She stood up, shaking her head. Back at her chair, she took another small sip of cognac. There was only a touch left, so she downed the glass and licked the inside as if it were a life preserver. "What now, Sid? What now? I mean, Mr. Buddha." A flash of brightness crossed her face. Now the Buddha let Sid take over. An uncommonly serious Sid. "Well, you know the drill. Doctor, complete blood workup. Maybe a psychiatrist, maybe meds, maybe not, maybe therapy. It's different for everyone. Maybe the Buddha will help," Sid smiled ruefully. "I thought you were the Buddha," she said, as if he'd let her in on a private joke. "It's complicated," the Buddha thought. "It's complicated," Sid said. "And Jake?" she asked. "Oh, he probably thinks it's postpartum." "Casper's 7 years old. Jake probably doesn't." Sid laughed loudly. Carolyn, I brought him up well. Deep down he knows all fools walk the edge of madness. Somewhere in that wild and crazy head of his, he understands." They hadn't heard anyone come in, but suddenly Casper was in the doorway, in his baseball outfit. "We won, Mom. I got 2 hits." "That's great." She stood up so he wouldn't see her red eyes. They were almost back to normal anyway. But Di saw them and looked at Sid, who just nodded. She had known all along. "We brought you and Sid Grandpa some pizza, Mom." Thanks for listening to The Man Who Woke Up the Buddha. If you go on the site on Substack, you'll see that annual paid subscribers get an author's proof of Season 1, plus an official Sid Ohm cap. And thanks, by the way, to everyone sending selfies wearing their caps. By the way, some think that a bright red hat with an Ohm on it is a political statement. The Buddha, of course, doesn't take sides. And Sid just likes it because he's a Red Sox fan.